Welcome to day 4 of the Autumn or Fall Watercolour Challenge. So for today's challenge we're going to paint a pumpkin or a squash, whatever you like to call them, and in the shops there have been so many beautiful ones, but I wanted to actually keep this quite simple, and I've chosen one of the white ones because not only are they really cool, I really love them, but also I think it's much more useful for you to learn how to mix these neutral colours than it is to learn just how to mix an orange, for example, which you could probably find ready-made. So we're probably going to mix this colour from scratch. We're also going to liven this picture up a little bit by being a little bit more colourful than usual with the shadow, which is a great thing to do if you've got a very neutral toned painting. Now, if you don't know what the Autumn Challenge is, we have 5 days of painting autumn subjects. It's all free here on YouTube. I am just charging, if you want the downloadable PDFs that go along with it, this time I'm charging $5. That's for the entire week, and you'll get all of the photographs, all the materials lists, everything you need. And I'm just charging that very small nominal fee just because it's weeks of work to get these things made. So if you're interested in that and you want those downloadable PDFs, do pop into the video description. Everything you need will be down there. You can also find details on my Facebook group. And let's get started with today's painting. So let's look at today's picture. The background has come out sort of a blue-grey, but that's just my printer. So we're not going to paint a background in this, but we are going to paint some shadow on the table. And I'm going to brighten this up significantly. And we're going to mix the base colour for this little pumpkin from scratch. Now, it's important when you're mixing colours to think about not only what the colour is, the hue of it, but also whether or not it is opaque or transparent and whether or not it has any texture. This is a very smooth colour. So it's really important that we choose to mix it from the right colours, and I'm not going to choose any granulating pigments. Unlike the little stem in the centre, which has lots of texture, that's going to get us a nice natural result. There's also some warm yellow here, which we're going to drop in, and I'll tell you which colours we're going to use for that as well. But as always with watercolours, light to dark, so I'm going to trace my picture down, and then we're going to start by mixing this neutral colour here, which does appear white. These are called ghost pumpkins, but it's actually not white at all, as you can see when you compare it to something that is white. So let's talk about colour mixing and why it can be so hard to actually find a ready-made paint colour that's like this. Now, if it's oils or acrylics, they could mix this colour and sell it to you in a tube. But the problem with watercolour paint is it's mostly pigment and a little binder. So in order to get a pre-mixed tube colour, this colour, and the closest one would probably be something like a buff titanium, but even that's not pale enough, really. In order to get a colour like this, you have to put a load of water in with the pigment, and so it just won't go in a tube. And so if you have a paint colour that's ready mixed like this and it is water soluble, it's going to have a whole ton of what they call body colour in. Opaque pigments, white in other words. And although there's nothing wrong with opaque pigments, they can be problematic in terms of layering. They're chalky, they don't layer well, which is why gouache paints don't layer well. The underneath layers disturb. So there's 2 ways of getting an opaque effect like this. The first one is opaque pigments. Now, because we have to go on top in layers and get these shadows and things, that's not going to work well for me, so don't want to use any white pigment. The second way to get something that looks really solid and opaque is to layer. In other words, to glaze layer on top of layer on top of layer. And so we're going to mix a very transparent colour. Now, I've got my tracing here, and I'll provide this for you in the PDF. As always, don't go as dark as I draw on camera. I only go this dark so that you can see properly. It's a little bit problematic to have such strong lines here, and I'll probably in a moment just take an eraser and just, partially erase some of these. But let's look at colour mixing first of all. So in order to mix a neutral, we need to take 3 primaries, and the easiest way to mix would be to use 3 cool primaries. So you might have seen the colours that printers use, which are CMYK. So we've got the 3 cool primaries like this, and then we've got black as well. It's a bit of a misunderstanding to think that those can mix any colour, because they simply can't. However, they can mix most colours, and so we've got a cool pink here. This one is a Jackman's Permanent Rose. Then I've got a lemon yellow. I think these are all Jackman's colours actually. An alternative to this Permanent Rose would be a quinacridone rose, which works very well indeed. As I said, we've got a lemon here, and then I've got a phthalo blue. Now, when I'm mixing these light neutral colours, I'll often use a cerulean blue because it's not as strong as phthalo. So it's easier if you're a beginner to get more of a light neutral mix, and you certainly can use it for this, but it's got a bit of granulation, whereas phthalo is smoother. So we're going to start with the lightest colour, and we're going to mix a nice puddle of water. Now, because we need to go right the way across this in one go, we need to mix a significant amount. So I'm not going to use a tiny palette well, I'm going to use this little dish. I'm going to start by mixing in the yellow and then adding in tiny little bits of the blue and the pink to balance it out. These are both very strong pigments, so we need to go easy on them. I'm going to move this out the way because I don't want to mix on top of it. Bad things will happen, and then we'll have a go at mixing this colour. Now, I've actually started by pouring some water in here, so don't be afraid to do that. Always mix more than you think you'll need. We're going to do multiple layers in this picture anyway. So I'm going to start by making this mix yellow, and then I tend to go in next with the blue. This will immediately turn it green. Only use the tiniest amount, and then we're going to pop some of the pink in. And what will start to happen is red and green are opposite colours, so we'll start to get more of a neutral shade. Now, I have to tell you that the colour you see in the dish here won't relate much to what it actually looks like when you swatch it. I just want it to be a bit stronger, so I'm going back in with the blue. So we can cool it down. If it's too yellow, we can cool it down by adding blue in, and then we'll need to neutralise that with some pink. So let's just swatch this colour and see how it looks. So at the moment, it's not bad at all, but I feel like the underneath layer of the pumpkin needs to be a little bit cooler than this, and then we can work those warmer colours in as we go up. Now, some people tell you to mix a neutral colour like this by using opposites, in other words, yellow and purple. If you think about it, you've got your purple here. Now, although that works, it doesn't allow you to control the amount of blue as opposed to the amount of pink because the purple is pre-mixed. So I always prefer to mix from primaries. So I want to go much cooler, so I'm going to put more blue in. Of course, that's going to go green, and then we're going to balance out. So yes, it's the same as adding purple, and if you've got a ready-made purple, you can try that. But you could end up with a colour that's just too brown and very little control over it. That is a much better colour. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, it will dry a lot lighter, but we're going to put layers on, so I'm going to start with this colour. First of all, I'm going to lighten the pencil marks that show me where those indentations are on the pumpkin so that I don't trap the pencil in. What we need to do next is what they call a flat wash, and so we need to put a smooth, even layer of paint right the way across this area, avoiding the little stem in the middle. We also don't want to leave any puddles. We don't want to stop and start. I've seen people that are new to watercolour painting, for example, paint around, an area like this, like you did when you were a kid and you were using felt tip pens, and so you sort of went around the edges first. You can't do that with watercolour paint because that will dry. You'll get a circular mark. So what we need to do is start one side and work across to the other. And because we've got essentially a donut shape here, the best way to do it is to work both edges at once. I'm also going to stir just in case there's any separation of pigments, which you sometimes get in a very watery mix. So I'm going to start up here. So we need the water levels to remain even. That doesn't mean that the whole thing has to stay wet, but it does mean that I need to keep that leading edge moving. If you have trouble doing things like flat washes, I have a full beginners watercolor techniques course. You'll find it on the course website, the same website where you'll find the $5 PDFs for this challenge. Just click all courses and you can see what's in there. The ones that people purchase most often are the beginner's drawing and the beginner's watercolor techniques. Both of those will give you a good basis for your painting. So I'm going to come around here now, trying to keep, not worrying about this, but trying to keep this leading edge wet. Now, if you do end up with a slight drying line, don't worry about it. Don't try to fix it because we're going to put more layers on this, which means that as we go on top, you'll find that underneath layers are slightly smoothed out. So I'm going to come across like this, working all the way down, letting my brush get quite dry here so that I don't end up with a puddle at the end. What you must not do at this point is go back with a damp brush to try and fix anything that looks, a little bit uneven. Something's appeared in my paint here, for example. It's probably just a little bit of abrasion on the paper or a fault in the paper, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to stick a damp paintbrush on it. That's how you ruin a flat wash, by going back. It's far better to let it dry and correct it afterwards. We're going to let this get completely dry, and the reason for that is that there are adhesives in watercolor paint. It's going to help fix the paint to the paper so that it will move less when we put the next layer on top. So we're about halfway through, and as always, can I ask you just quickly, if you're enjoying this tutorial, to give me a thumbs up. If you click the like button, leave me a comment, subscribe, or better than anything is to share this video with other people so they can take advantage of these very simple painting tutorials too. Now let's get back to today's subject. We're going to do our second layer, and we're going to introduce a little bit of this warm yellow colour here. Now I've got this colour here, which is a diarylite yellow. You could also use something like a cadmium yellow deep or an Indian yellow. I would prefer, if at all possible, that you don't use yellow ochre because it's a very dull, muddy colour. We might use it in the centre here. If the only warm yellow you have in your set is a yellow ochre, what I suggest you do is use your lemon instead and warm it up with some scarlet red, some orange, or some pink. Now, I actually don't want the lightest parts of this painting to go. So what I'm going to do is, for my second layer, I'm going to put clean water on, and then I'm going to put a little more of the colour we used just around this side and the base, because we've got the shadow here. So the light's obviously coming from this direction. So I don't want this any darker, but I am going to wet it, because if we work on part of our painting, then we'll get a drying line. And also I need to drop some of the yellow in. I'm actually going to use two brushes. So I've got this one to apply the water and the previous colour. Now I don't know if you can see because it's moved as soon as I picked it up, but it was actually a deep purple. Now what's happened there is the yellow is the more granular of these three pigments, so it's sunk to the bottom. So you will need to stir your colour, and if you have used something like cerulean, even more so. So let's put our next layer on. I'm going to rinse this brush and start with clean water. So let's come over this side. As I said, I don't want it any darker there, so just sticking to clean water until we get round here, when I'm going to add some colour in. Not going too dark at this stage, so we're not doing all of those shadow areas yet. Just getting it so it looks a little bit three-dimensional. Dry your brush if necessary so you don't get too much bleeding. Now I'm going to add in a little bit of this light orange where I see it. The reason it's bleeding so much is the paint is fairly wet. If I want to, I can dry my brush and just blend that out a little. But the aim is to make this version more interesting than the photograph anyway. So I'm pretty happy with that layer, and I'll allow it to dry again. Now this layer is dry, I'm going to go on top again, and I do mean allow these layers to dry. It's very important. It helps the paint to stick to the paper. So now this is dry, I'm going to mix up a shadow colour. I'm going to use the colours I've already used. So we're going to use these three colours again. I'm going to mostly start mixing from the blue and the pink, so we get a purple, and then just dull it slightly with the lemon. Again, I'll move my board out the way. So this time we want to mix a thicker, stronger colour, because as we add it to the paper which has water on, it will become diluted. We'll only need small amounts of it. Yes, I should have washed my brush, shouldn't I? Never mind. Nearly at the end of this painting. So we're just going to keep adjusting until I get what's essentially a slightly muted purple. When you think you've got it right, you can swatch. That's a bit too grey for me, which means it's got too much yellow in, so I'm going to add more blue and purple until I get what I want. It should be dark and strong because we're going to only add tiny amounts. So I'm going to wet the whole thing with clean water and make sure that you do change your water at this point so you've got properly clean water. We don't want any murkiness going on. So I'm just going to take this water all the way around as quickly as I can. Again, avoiding that stem in the middle. It's okay to take it close to the edge without going over the edge because you can't always see where you're painting with water. And you have to be careful because the darker colour will follow the water. So if the water's gone outside of your object, the darker colour will follow. Just making sure there's no puddles. Now I'm going to change to a smaller brush and very quickly start adding in some shadow. And we need to work fast here so things don't get a chance to dry. If they spread too far like that, just dry your brush and you'll be able to pick up. Just following where you see the shadows. If your paint starts to dry, there's nothing wrong with allowing the whole thing to dry and then putting on another layer of clean water very carefully and starting from there. I'm going to try and get it done in one go, but you really don't want to be messing around with it too much when the paint's drying. So let's get that darker shadow in around here. As always with watercolor, working fast is a little bit more important than being 100% slavishly accurate to your subject. Now it looks a little dark, but I can always lift some out and it will of course dry much lighter. So hold your nerve and see how it looks when it's dry. I'm using a very dry brush to manipulate this here so we don't get any bleed lines. I've just realized this part here is completely in shadow. Let's add some there. And this is now at the point where I really need to leave it alone. I'll allow it to dry and see if it's too dark or not. I honestly don't think that it will be because you can see from the original photograph how dark it is around the sides. Now I'm going to keep this colour I mixed because I've got a feeling I might go a little darker around this centre part here. So we'll put that aside. It's drying out, but it'll I was going to say reanimate. I think I've been watching too many zombie movies. You know what I mean? It'll come back to life. So I have been watching too many zombie movies. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint this, and we've got this kind of muddy green. Now, at first I thought I might introduce some yellow ochre. And if you have yellow ochre, you certainly could use it here. But I'm actually going to just continue using this bright warm yellow, and I'm going to add in some ultramarine, and that will give me the granular texture that I want. It'll also turn this to a very dull sort of green. So I'm just going to pop a layer of this on, and I have actually also pulled out a brown watercolor pencil. I think I've used that in every single one of these challenge videos so far, with the exception of perhaps the spider's web. So I'm going to put a layer of this across. Now I'm going to clean and dry my brush so that I can pick up some blue and it's not too drippy wet, which means it should stay, you know, more or less where I put it. We've got quite a lot of green down the base here, and we can manipulate that. Going in as well with my watercolor pencil to get some details here. We've got some sort of dark brown areas which I may go on top with some shadow later on. I'm actually going to take some of this yellow over here because I feel like this area here, it's hard to see on the photograph, but I feel like this area here is part of the center. It's just that it's got a shadow cast on it as well. It's very hard to say. I think there's possibly, you know, an area where this circles round here, and then we've got some shadow in there as well, but let's not worry about that too much. Let's put a bit of dark in. Also going to go a little bit dark up the top here. Going to leave it at that for now. It's a little bit brighter than in the photograph, but as I said, I want to brighten things up anyway. And again, we need to let this dry. Whilst that's drying, I'm going to place the shadow in, then just come back and do one or two finishing touches around the center. So we're going to do the shadow, and I'm going to do something a bit mad, and some of you probably will come in the comments and say, why did you do that, Michelle? Because it's not the same as the photograph. I'm going to put a really bright blue shadow in here. And here's my reasoning. I feel like it. I think it will brighten things up. I've done it before in other paintings. It always looks dramatic. I'm going to put an ultramarine shadow in here. There's just something about an ultramarine shadow on white paper that always looks stunning, and it will really lift this painting. Now, if it's not your choice to do that, that's absolutely fine. You can be a lot more natural if you want to be. I want a bright blue shadow, so I'm going to have one. And I'm putting clean water much further out than the area of the shadow. I should probably have lifted some of that pencil out. As I said, I would prefer you not to draw your pencil around the shadow at all, or at least to keep it much lighter than mine. So you can barely just see where to put the paint. And here we go, in with my blue. What you want is the shadow to be darkest near the object and to lighten as it comes out. The wetter the paint is that you go in with, the more it will bleed and spread. So it's kind of up to you how far you want to go with it. Just cleaning my brush there so that I can just come out a little bit like this. In the actual photograph, we've got sort of a second area like this, and you can almost just make that happen with your brush by picking up paint that's already there and moving it around. Here's my bright blue shadow. You can fight me in the comments. So now my shadow's dried, let's make a few final adjustments. I feel like I want more green and warm brown on the stem. So I'm going to go back to just see if I can get a bit of clean paint from the middle there. I'm just going to get a bit of the phthalo blue and use it as sort of a transparent glaze to go across the top of this area. There, that's worked quite beautifully. I've also picked up another pencil. This one's more of a red brown, and I'm going to just get a little bit of warmth in here, mixing with the darker brown as well. I'm also going to go in a little stronger with the shadow around here. Technically, I should let this area here dry first, but let's live dangerously. Just looking to get a little bit more definition here. May even just take a couple of lines out like this, and then just with a clean damp brush just spread those along slightly. I'll do a little more over this side, then I think it's time for me to leave it alone. I also need to see how much of this dotted line here will erase. I'll put a picture up so you can see how it turned out. So do let me know in the comments what you thought of today's subject and if you're going to have a go yourself. Don't forget to share it with other people. And before you leave the video, don't forget to visit the video description. That will tell you where you can download the accompanying PDFs if that's something that you want to do. You'll also find lots of free stuff down there. There's some free downloads, there's some free courses, and also all of my longer paid watercolor painting and drawing courses. Meantime, you can watch another video right here.